This is the wood I've selected for the legs. Now the legs are going to be probably 1 inch thick in one dimension. So I'm going to use some 5/4 wood for the legs. I need pieces about 27 inches long. And I usually start off just by rough marking them in chalk. And this piece on the end is not going to be good for use. It's got some cracks in it. You can see some material there that's coming off. So I'm going to cut off that piece and waste it. And then I'll cut the pieces 27 inches from there. I'll give myself a little bit extra, make it 27.5. One thing I've learned the hard way is measure it twice before you cut it. Make sure you got your marks right, because you can't make it any longer once you've cut it off. So that's 27.5, and that's 27.5. I don't have room in my shop for a chop saw, so I'm just going to use a jigsaw to cut the pieces off. These few cuts won't make much sawdust, so I'm not going to set up the dust collection. And just a quick rough cut. I'll finish it with on the table saw to the straight dimensions. Are wider than my joiner, so I'm going to take a couple of passes off in the planer, makes them a little easier to manage in the table saw, and then I'll join them into good square lumber next. Before I run through the planer, I always brush the surfaces with a stiff brush, because little grains of sand that may get caught in there can cost you $90 joiner blades, or sorry, planer blades. Take off about a 30-second. Planer is one of my favorite tools in the shop. You can really turn out the wood chips. I'm going to make one square edge on the joiner that I can put up against the fence in my table saw when I rip it down to the blank size. I'm going to rip these lead blanks to 2 1/4 inches, and I'll probably make at least one spare in case I have some problems along the process. Alright, here's my 4 leg blanks, and I think I'll keep these cut-off pieces because they're the same thickness as the blank, and I can use them for test setups. Next thing I'm going to do is joint the wood. I've already run it through the planer, but you really don't get 2 parallel surfaces until one surface is completely flat. So you can see here that these boards have a slight warp in them, at least some of them do. So you can see that when I squeeze the different ends, it opens the cracks. So I'll run these through the jointer now. There's a good picture. It shows that this board has a fairly significant swale in it over the length of the board. So I'll run them through the jointer, get one side flat, and then I'll run them again through the planer to get the 2 sides parallel and flat. Then I'll let the board sit probably overnight before I plane them, just to let them finish warping. Sometimes as you remove material from the outside of the wood, it'll warp a little bit, and so you don't want to do all your finished sizing in one day. It makes the process slow, but you end up with flatter, straighter boards if you do it this way. In order to joint the wood flat, you have to understand the shape that it is currently. So I usually find a flat surface like my workbench, which is flat enough for this, although I did go over it just now with a furniture scraper to get off any pieces of glue or paint that might be above the surface. Then you just put the board on the surface and see if it rocks or doesn't touch the board, the benchtop uniformly. Notice here there is in fact a gap between the wood and the middle. You can see at both ends the paper drags, but in the middle it's elevated. Flip it over the other way, and actually you can see this one is raised a little on the ends now, but not in the middle. So that tells me the board is warped this way, very slightly. But now to join it, I never join it with the belly side towards the joiner. I always join it with the bent ends towards the joiner. So I'll join it this way. And that way I can go in there and just knock off a little bit this end and knock off a little bit of this end until it gets down flat, and then I'll take a cut to make it uniform. If you try to do it on the belly side, the board tends to rock, and it's hard to get a smooth cut in the middle that's uniform. So that's my technique. If the board's bent, take it off the two ends, and then come back, smooth the belly later. Now to take it off the two ends, what I do is I'm pushing through the joiner. I'll start off pushing on the infeed table, but once the wood has cut, it has to cut. I have to hear it actually digging in. It's cut. Now it should be level with the outfeed table, so I'll put my hand here and push it the rest of the way on the outfeed table, and that way it trims off the last little bit on this end. So that's my joining technique for bent boards. Okay, I'm ready to joint the wood. Two things to start with. You need to know the direction of the grain. If you go against the grain, it'll chip out pretty badly. So here the grain is going this way. On this end of the board, it's kind of going the other way. So this is going to be a tricky board. So I'll take a real light cut. Right now, let's see, that's a very shallow cut. Okay, now, the other thing you have to do is make sure your beds are free of chips. Since we're trying to flatten the board using the reference of the metal surfaces, you can't have any chips on there or it'll raise the board off the wood surface. So, my technique for pushing it through is use push blocks. Start by pushing with the weight on the infeed table until I have a section over here that's flat, and then I'll shift and push through put most of the weight on the outfeed table. That way I'm cutting this piece of the wood about the same depth that I cut that front end. So that's the technique. Let's see how it works out. Just put the board on my workbench top again, and it still has a little bit of bow in it, so I'm going to do the same process again. End of this board has some real twisted grain, so you can see I got some chip out there. I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of pretty grain though. You can see the pattern, so I'm going to try to preserve that, and I think that's probably flat enough.